Is part 2 of whether rock is inherently a white genre. We'll tackle the fundamental differences that predispose certain individuals to specific genres, including the prevailing ideas and misconceptions in which both blacks and whites hold about the actuality of the American consumer. Rock is deemed too raunchy for white consumption. The rock genre started with African Americans such as Little Richard and Big Mama Thornton. They mostly played gospel hymns, mixing the working class underpinnings of black culture with the humble roots of blues music. In a sage scholarly journal, it details how, quote, working class culture and blackness, early rock and roll, was understood by critics as primitive, rebellious noise bearing a message of moral decay. In the Tempest magazine article titled How Rock Became White by Geoff Bailey, it adds to this idea by stating conservatives railed against rock and roll language that was explicitly racial. They called it jungle stuff cannibalistic and tribalistic. Bailey continues, they were outraged by the possibility that black and white kids might get touchy on the dance floor. You see this same phenomenon in the modern day political landscape. Here's a tweet from conservative commentator Matt Walsh regarding the panic that has long plagued American society. If you like the content, please consider subscribing to the Evermore Sound YouTube channel today. In fact, in many corners you see a revolt away from the degeneracy of the climate we find ourselves in, becoming deeply entrenched in moral platitudes which are damaging and unrealistic. Those like Walsh argue that the culture decline started decades ago, arguing it was ushered in through rock music and has steadily trickled down further into an abyss of hedonism and Satanism on behalf of the popularity of hip-hop music. The image white America desired. It's no secret that Tina Turner struggled to find her footing during some turbulent times in America. In her 2021 documentary titled Tina, it details how Turner's identity differed from the images that many blacks and whites had become accustomed to seeing. There was no familiarity with Turner's raspy vocals or spiky blonde hair. She was unapologetically black, and many audiences in America punished her for that, even resented her, while others welcomed her with open arms. Tanisha Ford, a history professor at CUNY's Graduate Center, said, while rock and roll is rooted in the black experience and the black musical tradition, the mainstream industry has racialized it as white music. Tina Turner had much resistance when she wanted to position herself as a rock and roll artist. There was no intention on Turner's part to be anything more than authentic, however. In those times, America had a minuscule view of black artistry similar to how they think today. But Tina Turner positioned herself into a rock image of perpetuity. Unlike other contemporaries, the private dancer singer faced a similar climate of distrust and hatred, similar to that of her predecessor, Jimi Hendrix. Truly, America treated black rock and roll players as pariahs, something to be feared rather than celebrated, outwardly expressing a vitriolic withdrawal from their musicality. In her piece, America Loved Tina Turner, but It Wasn't Good to Her, Soraya McDonald writes, as much as America has proclaimed its love for Turner in the wake of her death, it continues to fail to fully see her. Turner's experiences were vastly different from her white counterparts. She had to work twice as hard. Because of this, Turner's success was largely concentrated in Europe. The perception of acting white and the real consumer. If you're black, there is an idea that anything beyond hip-hop is not made for black consumption. I've certainly heard that growing up, and I'm sure that if you are black, you've heard that as well. In part 1, I referenced the article from Slate, How Rock and Roll Became White. Jack Hamilton talked about the aftermath of Jimi Hendrix's musical reign. He says, when Hendrix died in 1970, one prominent obituary pointedly described him as a black man in the alien world of rock. After the Freedom Singer's death, Hamilton shows how black rock musicians were mistreated by U.S. society. He says, according to anthropologist Maureen Mahone, by the mid-1970s, young black musicians who wanted to play songs by Led Zeppelin and Grand Funk Railroad recalled being ridiculed by white and black peers. When black artists tried to venture into other forms of music, namely rock and roll, they were cast aside by their own and white individuals. Many were closed off to the idea of blacks playing certain types of music. In a CNN article how Jimi Hendrix's race became his invisible legacy, John Blake explains Hendrix traveled to Harlem because he was trying to connect with blacks who had dismissed him as a Uncle Tom, a black man playing white man's music. Music critics and biographers say Hendrix also was frustrated by legions of white fans who only saw him as a racial stereotype, a hypersexual black man who was high all the time, instead of a serious musician. Black people committed a blasphemous crime against Hendrix as whites did. Instead of embracing a different face for music, both races shunned him. Cleopatra Boxer Clark states, the Black Rock Coalition was formed in 1985 by guitarist Vernon Reid, journalist Greg Tate, singer D.K. Dyson, and producer Conda Mason. Their main concern centers around the music industry's refusal to accept black rock artists and the negative criticism from black peers questioning their quote-unquote blackness. For Hip Hop DX magazine, Omar Burgess recalls, a friend of mine that works at Sony Records was talking about Adele, and some people were saying, well, that's just a white woman singing black folks music. Yeah, but white folks are buying it. If we bought Anthony Hamilton, if we bought Erykah Badu the way that we're supposed to, then it wouldn't be no problems. Advertisers follow money. Though Adele isn't a rock-centered artist, the target audience buys her records, while black artists like the ones Burgess mentions do not. In popular media, there's still this idea that the real consumers of hip-hop are white, but it has been proven false. The idea comes from the quote, the assumption that in America white males have the most disposable income. The issue then lies in who should and should not listen to rock music. Though the bands I enjoy don't market music for black audiences, the genre can be celebrated by anyone. It certainly is by me. Those like Jan Winter understand rock and roll was popularized and conceptualized by black people. They just simply don't care. However, in conclusion, I believe that it can be understood in its entirety by those that look like I do. We can have more artists like Willow Smith who take on punk rock and went beyond their designated color lines. Hi, if you like the channel, if you like today's content, please consider subscribing for more videos like today. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.